You are watching the Neuro-Affirming Conversation Hour for outreach and support. The Humanities 101 Foundation welcomes you.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to NACHOS, the Neuro-Affirming Conversation Hour for outreach and support. I am so glad that you're here. So whether you're listening, whether you're driving, resting, working, walking, cleaning, scrolling, or simply trying to make it through the day, I hope this can be a soft space to land for a little while. Around here, we try to make room for real life, as messy as that is, the complicated parts, the joyful parts, the tired parts, and the parts we're still learning how to name. And today I want to begin with a quote often attributed to Kierkegaard. That's Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard said, "There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true, and the other is to refuse to believe what is true." And that line's been staying with me because it's not just about being tricked by other people. It's also about the stories we inherit, the stories we're handed, and the stories we sometimes cling to because they once helped us survive. Sometimes we believe what is not true because we were taught it was true. We were told we were too much, we were too sensitive, too dramatic, too needy, too different. We were told that rest had to be earned, asking for help was weakness, and that success meant pushing through even when our bodies and our minds were begging for us to stop. And after a while, those messages can start to feel like facts. Kierkegaard gives us the second way of being fooled too, refusing to believe what is true. And that can be a pill that is harder to sit with, because sometimes the truth is inconvenient. Sometimes the truth asks us to admit that something is not working. A system, a relationship, a workplace, a classroom, a routine, a version of ourselves we outgrew a long time ago. And refusing that truth doesn't always look like denial in the same dramatic way. Sometimes it looks like staying busy. Sometimes it looks like making excuses for people who keep harming us. Sometimes it looks like calling ourselves lazy when we are actually burned out. Sometimes it looks like saying, "I'm fine," because we don't have the energy to explain how not fine we really are. But here, in this space, we're not here to beat ourselves up for any of that. We're here to notice gently, honestly, with compassion, because maybe part of becoming more whole is learning to ask, is this actually true, or is it just familiar? Is this belief helping me live, or is it keeping me small? Am I ignoring something because it's false, or because it's true and I'm not ready to face what it really means? And that's the rumination I want to begin with today, not as a lecture, not as a scolding, but as an invitation. What we've been taught to believe what have we been taught to believe that was never truly true? And what truth might be waiting for us if we open ourselves up to it? What truth is waiting for us, not to punish us, but to set us down more gently in our own lives? And in many ways, that's exactly what we're doing in our final project. We're not asking, can you repeat information back? Can you pass a test? We're asking something deeper. Can you look at the world as it is, question what we've been told is normal, and imagine what might be if we were to make it more true, more humane, and more accessible? Because every final project begins with a belief. Maybe that belief is that a classroom has to look a certain way. Maybe it's that a workplace has to function around speed, noise, and constant availability. Maybe it's public spaces that are already designed for everyone, and if someone struggles, that struggle belongs only to them. Maybe it's the old belief that accommodation is extra or special treatment or something added on after the real design is finished. But this course has been asking us to pause and test all of those beliefs. What if the problem is not the person? What if it's a barrier in the design? What if what we call normal is just what we've gotten used to? What if accessibility is not a side issue, but one of the clearest ways we can measure whether a space is actually working. And that's why the final project is not just a presentation. It's a small act of truth testing. We're taking one piece of the world, a classroom, a workplace, a home, a website, a store, a routine, a public space, a community practice, and we are asking, who is this built for? Who is being left out? What belief is hidden inside this design, and what could change if we told the truth about that? And that truth doesn't have to be dramatic to matter. It doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be mean. Sometimes the truth is simple. This space is too loud. This instruction is unclear. This process assumes that everyone communicates the same way. This schedule leaves no room for our human bodies and their functions. This design works for some people, but not for all. Once we can name that truth, we can begin to imagine something better. So as you work on your final project, I don't want you to think of it as proving that you've watched the videos or read the material. I want you to think of it as practicing the kind of attention the world needs more of, the kind of attention that notices barriers, the kind of imagination that asks what could be different, the kind of humanity that refuses to accept exclusion just because it's familiar. That's the work. We're testing what we have been told is true, and we're making room for what might actually be true. That more people could belong when we design with more people in mind. And I want to remind you something important here. You only have to present for this final, all right? And that doesn't mean that there's only one way to present, but everyone, you're not doing a paper, you're not giving me presentation slides, you are presenting. The whole point is that there should be many ways to show understanding. You can give a ad hoc, kind of off the cuff presentation. You can read a paper out loud. You can create a slideshow and work through it verbally, right? You can make a short video with yourself presenting. You can walk us through the object, the story, the proposal, or the idea. What matters is that not everyone's final looks the same because we don't all look the same. What matters is that your final helps us understand the accessibility issue you noticed, the truth you're testing, and the change you're imagining. And that connects us directly to how we assess this stuff, or at least how I assess this stuff. Because I'm not looking for perfection. I am looking more holistically at really three things. First thing, understanding. Does your project show that you understand the ideas we've been discussing? Universal design, things of that nature. Can you explain the barrier, the need, the context, and why this matters? Secondly, imagination. Does your project offer a creative or thoughtful way forward? It doesn't have to solve everything, and it doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't have to be expensive or complicated, but it should show that you're thinking beyond, this is how we've always done it. And lastly, human impact. Does your presentation help us feel why this matters for real people? Can you communicate the human stakes for your idea? Can you help us see how a small change might make someone's life, learning, work, access, comfort, or belonging a little better? And so, yes, to answer the question, you can use AI as a tool. You can use notes. You can use your creativity, your own voice, your own style, your own strengths. But the final needs to have you in it. Your thinking, your choices, your explanation, and your care. Because the goal is not to perform intelligence in one narrow way. The goal is to practice humanity, and that looks different. That looks messy. So what does it mean to practice humanity? It's to notice that barrier, imagine a change, and explain why that change could help someone belong. And let me repeat clearly, yes, you can use AI. I know, I said it. You can use AI to brainstorm. You can use it to help organize your thoughts, to help to work on your outline, to polish your language, make a slide, test an idea, or ask, what might I be missing here? Because AI is now a part of the world we're living in. Pretending it doesn't exist would not make us any more thoughtful. It would just make the assignment less honest. And for some people, AI can even function as a micro-accommodation. A micro-accommodation, remember, is that small support that helps remove a barrier, the thing that you're writing for your final. It doesn't do the work for you. It helps make the work more accessible. For one person, that might be captions. For another person, it might be flexible timing, written instructions, a checklist, or permission to use notes. And for some of us, AI serves that similar purpose. AI might help when your thoughts are all there, but you feel tangled. It might help you turn a messy idea into an outline. It might help you find the first sentence when starting is the hardest part. It might help you translate your thinking into a format other people can follow. It might help you check whether your presentation makes sense before you record it. And that's not cheating. That's access. Because here's the important part. Access is not the same as replacement. The final is not assessing whether a machine can generate a presentation. It's assessing your engagement as a human being in a world where AI now exists. Can you ask good questions? Can you make good choices? Can you notice when an answer feels too generic, too flat, too easy, or too disconnected from real people? Can you take a tool and still bring your own judgment, your own care, your own understanding, and your own voice into that work? That's what matters. So yes, if AI helps you, use it as a support, use it as a scaffold, use it as a micro-accommodation, but do not let it replace your thinking. Let it help you access your thinking. Then ask yourself, do I understand this? Do I believe this? Can I explain why this matters? Where am I in this project? Because that's what I'm looking for. Not perfect polish, not fancy academic language, not a final project that sounds like it was written by a committee of robots in a windowless office. I'm looking for evidence that you've engaged with the course, with the ideas, with the problem, and with the people affected by that problem. And ultimately with the possibility that the world could be a different and better place than it is right now. So in that sense, it's not banned, right? As it may be rightfully in other classes. I think AI is part of the context of the final. The real question is not, did you use AI? The real question is, how did you use your humanity while using the tools available to you? And that brings us to this week's participation question. As you think about your final project, I want you to answer this. What is one belief, assumption, or quote unquote normal way of doing things that your final project is questioning? So what is one belief, assumption, or quote unquote normal way of doing things that your final project is questioning? And what more accessible possibility are you imagining instead? So give us a little sneak peek. Let us know what you're working on. So remember, this is the work of the final project kind of in one sentence. You're identifying something we often accept without thinking. Then you're asking whether it has to be that way. And that kind of brings us back to Kierkegaard. Because when he says there are two ways to be fooled, believing what is not true or refusing to believe what is true, he's asking us to take truth seriously. Not as a weapon, not as a way to prove we're smarter or better than someone else, but as a way of becoming more honest about the world we're living in. And when we question what is, and we imagine what could be, we're doing something brave. We're taking a kind of leap of faith, not a blind leap, not a reckless leap, but a human one. We're choosing to believe that the world can be made better. We're choosing to believe that people are worth designing for. We're choosing to believe that access matters, that care matters, that belonging matters, and that small changes can open doors that have been closed for far too long. And underneath all of that is a deeper faith, a faith that humanity is still worth investing in. And that can be hard to believe sometimes. I know it. You know it. We see cruelty. We see exclusion. We see systems that keep repeating harm and then calling that harm normal. We see people dismissed because their needs are inconvenient, misunderstood, or unfamiliar. But the final project asks us not to stop there. It asks us to look at a barrier and say, this is real, yes, but it's not inevitable. It's not the way it has to be always. It asks us to look at a person's struggle and say, maybe the problem is not that they failed the space. Maybe the space failed them. It asks us to look at the world as it is and still believe that another version is possible. That's the leap of faith. And maybe in a very Kierkegaardian way, it's also a refusal to be fooled. A refusal to believe that false story, that nothing can really change. A refusal to believe the false story that access is too much to ask for. A refusal to believe that false story that some people simply do not belong and should not be here. Instead, we choose to believe a harder truth, that humanity becomes more human when we make room for more humans. So as you prepare your final, don't just ask, what am I presenting? Ask, what am I choosing to believe is possible? Because somewhere inside that answer is the heart of your project. And because this is a humanities class, when we bring a name like Kierkegaard into the room, we should pause for a moment and ask, who the hell are we talking about? Why does this thinker matter? And why does he help us see? Because people throw out names, Mozart, Kierkegaard, Einstein, and we just accept them. But who the heck are they? So who is Kierkegaard? Søren Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher. He was a theologian, so he wrote about religion as well. He was a writer and he was a social critic. He lived briefly from 813 to 1855. He spent most of his life in Copenhagen. And even though he died at 42, he produced a huge body of work. And it crossed lots of different disciplines, philosophy, theology, psychology, literature, social criticism, religious reflection. And the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy notes that his work is difficult to categorize into one simple genre because it resists neat systems and formal labels. Very Kierkegaardian thing. He was not just trying to build a theory, he was trying to ask us what it meant to actually live as a finite human being. And that's one reason Kierkegaard is often called the father of existentialism, although I think that label is too simple as well. He influenced later existential and phenomenological thinkers, right? Like Heidegger and Sartre the Farta and Jaspers. I had a literature professor always called Sartre a Farta and others. But he also influenced theologians, novelists, painters, poets, filmmakers, and psychologists. His concern was not just abstract knowledge. His concern was inwardness, choice, anxiety, despair, faith, love, and what it means to become fully ourselves and a self. Kierkegaard was deeply religious, yes, but not in a casual or comfortable way. He was raised a Lutheran. He studied theology and he qualified to become a pastor, so he wasn't fly by night. Although he was never ordained, later in life, he became kind of a fierce critic of Christendom. He did not like what he saw as the cultural version of Christianity, where everyone assumed they were Christian because they lived in a Christian society. He wanted something more honest, more inward, and more demanding than simply inheriting a label. And that matters for us here, because Kierkegaard is not just asking, what do you say you believe? He's asking us truly, how do we live? How do you live when the truth costs you something? What do you do when the world gives you a script, but your conscience, your faith, or your humanity asks you to step outside that script. One of Kierkegaard's most famous works is Fear and Trembling, and this was published in 1843 under the pseudonym Johann de Silencio, or John of Silence. And that detail matters because Kierkegaard often wrote through pseudonyms, also almost like characters, each representing a different way of seeing the world. So when we talk about fear and trembling, we're not simply saying, Kierkegaard says this directly, we're entering a dramatic kind of philosophical exploration of faith through a narrator who is fascinated by faith, but also admits he cannot fully understand it. So in that book, Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard explores the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac. Abraham is asked to sacrifice Isaac, the child he loves, and the child with whom God's promise is supposed to continue. And at the last moment, Isaac is spared. Kierkegaard's narrator uses that story not because it is easy, but because it is disturbing. It raises the question, what is faith if it cannot be fully explained from the outside? What does it mean to have faith that is not fully explained from the outside? What does it mean to trust when reason, ethics, emotion, and social expectation all seem to collide, or worse yet, be thrown out the window? And for Kierkegaard and for us, that brings us to the night of faith. And for Søren, and I guess for us, the night of faith is not someone who simply believes nice things. The knight of faith is someone who has passed through loss, uncertainty, and surrender, but somehow still returns to the world with hope. And Kierkegaard contrasts that with the night of infinite resignation. And the night of infinite resignation can give something up. They can let go. They can accept loss with dignity. That's powerful, but it's not yet faith. Faith for Kierkegaard involves a second movement, somehow receiving the world back again. Loving finite life again, trusting that meaning is still possible even after surrender. And that's where the famous idea of the leap of faith comes in. A leap of faith is not just believing random things without evidence. It's not anti-thinking. It's not refusing intelligence. Kierkegaard is much more complicated than that. The leap is about the moment when a person must choose, when they cannot hide forever behind systems or formulas, public approval, or perfect certainty. At some point, to live is to commit. To love is to commit. To care is to commit. To build a better world is to commit. And for our purpose, that's where Kierkegaard becomes really interesting. Because when you question what is and imagine what could be, you're making a leap of faith. You're saying, I cannot prove in advance that everything will work out or will care. I can't prove in advance that this will change and fix everything. I can't prove in advance that the world will become a more humane or accessible place just because I name one barrier. But I'm still going to act as if human beings are worth it and do it anyway. That's the leap of faith in humanity. It's the belief that people are not problems to be managed, but lives to be honored. It's the belief that access is not extra. It's the belief that if we tell the truth about barriers, then maybe we can build something better on the other side of that truth. And now that we have that background, we can even go a step further. Because Kierkegaard not only gives us that night of faith, but he also gives us the strange and powerful relationship between faith and the absurd. The idea that faith sometimes asks us to hope beyond what appears reasonable from the outside. And that's where we're going next, into that night of faith, the absurd, and what it means to keep believing in possibility when the world tells us possibility is foolish. So remember, the Knight of Faith isn't a superhero. He's not someone who floats, or he or she is not someone who floats above ordinary life untouched by fear or doubt, grief or uncertainty. In fact, what makes the Night of Faith so powerful is that basically the Night of Faith is ordinary life. The Night of Faith is ordinary. They still live in the world. They still eat dinner. They walk down the street. They talk to neighbors. They pay attention to life. But inwardly, for the Night of Faith, something profound has happened. Kierkegaard is interested in the difference between giving something up and believing it still can be received again. The first moment is what he calls the infinite resignation, right? When a person lets go of something deeply loved. They accept the loss, the surrender, right? They surrender the expectation that, good guys will win. Bad guys get punished, something like that. They say, I may never get this back. And I have to live with that. It's time to grow up. And that's already a hard thing. And it's also a noble thing. But the Night of Faith makes a second movement after surrendering, after facing the impossible, after admitting that from a human point of view, there may be no clear way forward. The Night of Faith still believes. Not because facts are easy, not because the world has a guaranteed happy ending, but because faith for Kierkegaard means standing in relationship to possibility, even when possibility looks absurd from the outside. And that word matters. Absurd. Absurd. For Kierkegaard and for us, the absurd does not simply mean silly or ridiculous. It means something that cannot neatly be explained by ordinary logic, public approval, social expectation, or practical calculation. And we have so much in the world that is absurd. It's the place where reason reaches its edge and a person still has to choose how to live. Now, the Stanford Encyclopedia notes that Kierkegaard's work is deeply concerned with what it means to exist, right? That finite human being. Not from the detached system building perspective, but from within our own lived experience, right? With all of its inwardness, all of our anxiety, our faith, our choices. So the Night of Faith is not someone who avoids reality. The Night of Faith sees reality clearly, maybe more clearly than most. They see the loss, they see the barrier, they see the impossibility, they see how the world works, and then somehow they still refuse to let impossibility have the final word. And that's where this becomes more than an old philosophical idea or an echo of a Doctor Who episode. Because every time we talk about accessibility, inclusion, and human dignity, we're also talking about possibility. And the world often tells us that possibility is foolish. The world says this is how schools work. This is how it is to go to work. This is what professionalism is. This is just how people are. That's too idealistic. That's too complicated. That will never happen. And the Night of Faith hears all of that. The Night of Faith doesn't pretend that resistance is not real, but the Night of Faith also says, I'm still going to believe that another way is possible. And that doesn't mean naive optimism. It doesn't mean ignoring harm. It doesn't mean pretending that every person or every system will immediately become kind or gentle or more humane. It means choosing to act from the belief that humanity is still capable of something better. And maybe that's one of the quiet lessons of the final project too. When you identify a barrier and imagine a micro-accommodation, you're doing something that may look small from the outside. A clearer instruction, a quieter space, a flexible format, a captioned video, hell, even a checklist. A different way to present knowledge, permission to use AI as a support. They may not look revolutionary at first, but they're acts of possibility. They say, I do not accept the way that things are is the only way that they can be. And that's kind of a leap of faith. Not that blind faith, not foolish faith, but faith rooted in human care. Faith rooted in love. Faith that says, even if the world calls access unrealistic, even if the world has normalized exclusion and harm, even if the world keeps confusing difficulty with inevitability, we can still choose to build something different. So when the world tells us that possibility is foolish, Kierkegaard helps us ask a better question. What if refusing possibility is actually the foolish thing? What if the real absurdity is not believing that people can belong? What if the real absurdity is building classrooms, workplaces, churches, cities, websites, systems, and communities for only one narrow version of the human experience? And then acting surprised when so many people can't fit within that narrow experience. The Knight of Faith keeps believing, not because the world makes belief easy, but because without that belief, we surrender the future to what already exists. And here on Nachos, we're not interested in surrendering the future. We're interested in asking what could be made more human, more accessible, more honest, and more joyful. And then taking one small, right, faithful step in that direction. And that brings us to where we are in the course. Next week, in a very practical sense, the class will be finishing up. Final projects will be due. You're going to present your ideas, and you're going to bring this part of our shared work to a close. But I hope the conversation doesn't end here. Because if Kierkegaard gives us anything useful here, maybe it's this reminder that life itself is a little bit of an absurd quest. We keep moving forward without perfect certainty. We keep loving people without guarantees. We keep trying to build better lives inside systems that do not always make that easy. We keep hoping, imagining, questioning, and beginning again. And that's why I hope you'll continue to stay connected even after you leave this class. Keep following on the YouTube channel, like the videos that help you, share with somebody who might need a softer place to land. Leave comments, join the conversation, visit humanities101.org. Stay connected to the work we're doing through Nachos, the Humanities 101 Foundation, and the larger community we're building here together. Because it was never meant to just be a class where you disappear after final grades are posted. This is meant to be a community. And communities matter because life will keep asking questions after the semester ends. You may run into a workplace that doesn't understand you. You may find yourself in a classroom, a relationship, a family system, or a public place that makes you wonder whether you belong. You may have moments where the world tells you that your hope is foolish, your needs are too much, or your dreams are unrealistic. And when that happens, I want you to know that you can come back here. Come back to the videos. Come back to the ideas. Come back to PB&J, predictability, balance, and joy. Come back to the reminder that access is not extra, rest is not failure, and that you are not a machine. And so, yes, you can come back to me too. Reach out. Call upon me. Stay in touch. Find me through Humanities 101 or the YouTube channel. I can't promise that I will have every answer because none of us does, but I'll promise that I'll have an answer. And I promise that I will keep trying to be a touchstone, a familiar voice, a steady reminder, a person who believes that your humanity matters. So as you move forward and toward your final projects in the next week, don't think of it as the end of the road. Think of it as more of a beginning. We're going to keep walking your own absurdly beautiful, complicated quest through life. And as you do, I hope you carry this with you as a belief that the world can be questioned, barriers can be named, access can be imagined, and humanity is still worth believing in. And one more practical note before we get to the end of the semester. I'll be posting grades by the end of the semester, the due date for our midterm time here. Once grades are posted, please take a moment to check everything carefully. If you see a problem, if you're confused about something, if you have a concern, email me. Don't wait. Don't assume we can circle back later in the summer or in the fall. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because I'm going on sabbatical. And I will not be returning to campus until January of 2027. During my sabbatical, I'm going to be working on several projects connected to teaching, accessibility, humanities education, and neuro-affirming practice. One of the biggest pieces is my upcoming Fulbright Specialist project in Uzbekistan, where I'm going to be working with colleagues, students, and institutions on American studies, humanities education, and inclusive approaches to learning. So while I'll still be doing meaningful education work, I will not be on campus in the usual way. I also have another, good news to share again. My book on raising autistic boys into kinder, more compassionate, better men is moving forward into publication in 2027. Editor's reading the manuscript right now, and everything's going swimmingly. And that project, grows out of so many of the same ideas we've talked about in this class. Humanity, access, care, communication, dignity, and the belief that people deserve more than the narrow scripts about who they are allowed to become. So this is an exciting season, but it also means we need to handle any course concerns promptly. Please check your grades when they're posted. Email me right away, and know that as this class ends, I'm grateful for the time we've spent thinking together. And I want to be clear about something else too. I'm not going away. Even though the class is ending, and even though I'll be on sabbatical, Nachos will continue. Weekly Nachos episodes will still be posted. My plan is to keep creating them throughout the week and then posting them on Mondays like usual. But I also want to invite you to grow with us, because over the next 6 months, Nachos may have a little bit more room to breathe, wonder, and experiment. I'll have more space to explore, read, think, obviously travel, and work outside the normal semester rhythm. And the content may shift too. We're still going to be rooted in the same values: neuro-affirming support, accessibility, humanity, community, and care. But we also may open doors to new conversations, new formats, and definitely, and most assuredly, new places. Because in the fall, that's going to include that travel content from Central Asia, including Uzbekistan and the Silk Road. We're going to think about culture, history, disability, education, storytelling, and humanity from places that many of us may only know through maps, headlines, and old trade routes in old history books. So stay tuned, keep following, keep liking, keep sharing, keep commenting, and keep growing with us, because Nachos is not just a course assignment or a one-time video. It's a living conversation. And my own absurd quest takes me into sabbatical, I hope you'll keep walking alongside us in whatever way you can. And as we begin to bring this episode to a close, I want to step back and look at the larger shape of what we've been talking about through this whole time. We started with Kierkegaard and this idea that there are two ways to be fooled: to believe what is not true, or to refuse to believe what is true. And in one way, that's been the whole episode. We've been asking what it means to test the stories we've inherited. We are also questioning what we have been told about normalcy, success, intelligence, productivity, care, belonging, even disability. Which of these stories are true? Which ones simply are repeated until we believe they're true? That's the question that matters in this class. Because humanities asks us to look at human beings in context. We don't just study ideas in the abstract. We study how ideas shape lives, how beliefs become systems, how systems become buildings, classrooms, deadlines, laws, traditions, routines, and expectations. And then we ask, who benefits from those expectations? Who gets pushed to the margins? And today, we connected that to our larger final project. Your final project is not just a school task. It's a practice in seeing. It's a practice in questioning. It's a practice in naming a barrier and imagining a more accessible possibility. And that matters so much because so much of the world teaches us to accept barriers as normal, hurdles as a given. That's just how it is, they tell us. That's just how it's always been done. It is what it is. That's not our problem. People just need to try harder. But if we've learned anything together, I hope it's this. Sometimes the problem is not the person. Sometimes the problem is the design. And that insight doesn't only apply to disability. It applies to how we live our lives together as individuals, as communities, and as a nation. We're living in a moment where many people feel exhausted, suspicious, overwhelmed, and disconnected. Many are struggling with money, health, loneliness, burnout, fear, grief, information overload, and a constant pressure to perform stability even when life feels unstable. And at the community level, we're also facing a crisis of trust. We often don't know how to listen to one another without immediately turning each other into enemies. We confuse disagreement with danger. We confuse complexity with weakness. We confuse care with softness and softness with failure. And when that happens, it becomes easier to retreat into false stories than it is to face difficult truths together. And as a nation, we're still wrestling with the same basic questions. Who gets to belong? And that question shows up everywhere. In schools, workplaces, in healthcare and public spaces, in access and poverty, in race, in gender and immigration, in rural communities, in urban communities, in the stories we tell ourselves about who deserves help and who is supposedly asking for too much. And that's why this episode matters beyond the final project or any class. Because accessibility is not just about ramps, captions, or accommodations. Although those things matter, accessibility is a way of asking whether our world is honest about human difference. It's a way of asking whether we're building for real people or for an imaginary person who is always calm, always healthy, always focused, always available, always wealthy enough, always able-bodied enough, always emotionally regulated enough, always ready to perform. I.e., the imaginary person that never has existed and never will exist. Real human beings need rest. We need support. We need clarity. We need flexibility. We need belonging. And we need systems that recognize that people are not machines. And that brings us back to the night of faith. To keep believing in possibility when the world tells us possibility is foolish. And that's not naive. It's necessary. It's necessary because every humane change began as something that someone was told was unrealistic. Every access point, every civil right, every shift in public consciousness, every way of teaching, working, parenting, or living began with someone asking, well, what if it doesn't have to be this way? And that's the leap. To believe that humanity is still worth designing for. To believe that truth can be faced without shame. To believe that a better world may begin with one small change. To believe that even in a difficult, absurd, complicated life, we can still choose care. So as you finish this class, as you prepare for your final project, or you move on to whatever is next, I hope you carry this with you. Question what is. Imagine what could be. Don't mistake familiarity for truth. Don't mistake exclusion for inevitability. And don't let a world that has grown comfortable with barriers convince you that accessibility is foolish. The future is not built all at once. Sometimes it begins with a clearer instruction, a kinder response, a quieter room, a flexible format, a different assumption, a willingness to listen, a refusal to give up on people. And maybe that's enough for today. Not everything, not the whole world fixed by morning, but one faithful step towards a world where more of us can belong. So before we go, let's take a moment to bring this back into ourselves, because Kierkegaard does not just ask us to think about better. He asks us to live better, live more honestly, to choose, to become, to stop hiding behind what everyone else says is normal, and to begin asking what is true, what is meaningful, and what kind of person we are becoming in the middle of all of it. So here we are at this week's affirmations. Say them if they help, borrow them if you need them, let them sit quietly with you if that's all you have energy for today. I will not mistake familiarity with truth. I will question the stories I've inherited, especially the ones that made me feel smaller than I am. I will remember that discomfort does not always mean danger. Sometimes discomfort means I'm meeting a truth I was not ready to face before. I will not shame myself for needing support. Access is not weakness. Accommodation is not failure. I will use the tools available to me, including AI if it helps, without surrendering my humanity, my judgment, and my voice. I will look for barriers with compassion, not blame. I will imagine better designs, better classrooms, better workplaces, better communities, and better ways of being together. I will practice the leap of faith, not by pretending everything is easy, but by believing possibility still matters when the world tells me it is foolish. I will remember that hope is not always loud. Sometimes hope is one small faithful step in the direction of care. I will believe that humanity is still worth investing in. I will keep becoming myself even when the path is uncertain. I will not let the absurdity of the world steal my responsibility to love, to notice, to question, and to build. I will move forward with curiosity. I will move forward with courage. I will move forward with enough faith to believe that another way is possible. And maybe that is what Kierkegaard is still whispering to us after all this time, that life is not something we solve from a distance. It's something we choose from within. We become ourselves by how we live, how we love, what we question, and what we dare to believe is still possible. And that's where I want to leave us today. Not with everything solved, not with every question answered, but with a little more courage to ask better questions, a little more compassion for ourselves and for each other, and a little more faith that another way is still possible. So as you move through this week, be gentle with yourself. Notice what is true. Question what is merely familiar. Look for one small place where the world could be softer, clearer, kinder, or more accessible. And remember, you are not a machine. Rest is revolutionary. Your needs are not failure. Access is not extra. You are already enough. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for thinking with me, growing with me, and being a part of this strange, beautiful, absurd quest we're on together. Like, follow, share, subscribe, comment, come back, and stay connected on humanities101.org. I'm so glad you were here. I'll see you next week. And as always, may you find a little more predictability to steady you, a little more balance to sustain you, and a little more joy to remind you that you're still fully human. Until then, be kind to yourself, be kind to each other, and keep believing that humanity is worth the leap.
Thank you for joining us. See you next week. The views and opinions expressed in this video are solely those of the creator and do not reflect the views of any institution, employer, or affiliated organization.